It was Thanksgiving night in a mansion blazing with lights, where laughter and the clink of glasses rose like a luxurious symphony of the wealthy. I, an old mother, sat quietly at the corner of the table, trying not to bother anyone. But in a single clumsy second, a glass of red wine slipped from my hand and bled across my daughter-in-law's pristine white dress, $10,000. Ruined. The entire table went silent. Camila sprang up, shouting, "My God! Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? You just ruined my whole party." Then smack! My son's hand struck my face, right there amid the music and the stunned stares. I stood there without tears, listening to the wine drip onto the floor like the rhythm of a breaking heart. They didn't know that what spilled that night wasn't just wine, but a secret powerful enough to bring them to their knees before me. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Helen Ward, 66 years old, a retired nurse after 35 years at a community hospital in Connecticut. My whole life was bound to the smell of antiseptic, the wail of ambulances, and overnight shifts. I raised Andrew, my only son, with calloused hands and a meager paycheck. When my husband died in an accident, Andrew was 12, and I swore I wouldn't let him lack for anything. I used to think if I worked hard enough and sacrificed enough, my son would grow into a grateful man. But when Andrew became a chief financial officer and married a beautiful, wealthy woman, I slowly realized I was no longer mom in his life. I was just a shadow reminding him of his poor beginnings. I kept pretending to be calm, bringing pumpkin pie every Thanksgiving, telling myself it was enough just to see my son happy. But tonight, when my own child's hand came down on my face in front of a crowd, I understood. There are lines that, once crossed, even a mother's love can't save what's left. I remember every detail of that evening. The Ward's mansion in the suburbs of Greenwich glittered like a luxury hotel. The smell of roast turkey, pumpkin pie, and wine threaded through soft jazz floating from Bose speakers hidden in the walls. On the long table draped in white, candlelight scattered across crystal glasses, sparkling like diamonds. I, Helen Ward, 66, widowed. Andrew's mother sat at the far end, so distant I had to lean in to catch what anyone was saying. Camila, my daughter-in-law, stood at the head of the table in a snow-white dress, flashing a perfect smile and soft waves of blonde hair. She lifted her glass and spoke in a clear, bright voice. "Andrew bought me this dress from an Italian designer. They only made 3 in the world. The price, well, about $10,000, but worth every penny, right?" Guests applauded, laughter rippled. Andrew sat beside his wife, nodding with pride, squeezing her hand in full view of everyone. The sight made me feel sad and out of place. I looked down at my calloused hands, hands that had steadied hundreds of patients over 30 years as head nurse, now clutching a napkin, afraid a small mistake might stain something that belonged to a world I no longer fit into. When the server poured wine, I smiled, trying to mind my manners, but the lights bouncing off the glass stabbed my eyes. Just 1 second. 1 second of age-shaken tremor and the feeling of being lost in a room without a single honest glance. The glass slipped from my hand. The dark red liquid like blood splashed and then spread across Camila's dress, painting a horrifying streak of crimson over pure silk. Sharp breaths sucked in. No one moved. Camila shot to her feet, eyes blazing. "My God, do you know how much this dress costs? You just ruined my entire party," I stammered. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." My words were cut off by a crack. Smack! Andrew's slap seemed to freeze the whole room. "You're always clumsy," he hissed. "Do you know how many important people are here? You just embarrassed me in front of all of them." I stood paralyzed, hands shaking. In that moment, I couldn't hear voices, only my heart pounding and the wine's faint scent in the air like dried blood. A few guests tried to stifle laughs, others lifted their phones to record, as if watching an expensive bit of entertainment at a high society party. Camila looked me up and down, her voice like ice. "Next time, if you can't hold a glass, do us a favor and don't come." I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. I wanted to say something, but my throat closed up. The sting on my cheek was nothing compared to the pain in my chest where my only son had just knocked down the mother who raised him with these hands. I set the glass down, stepped back, and bowed my head slightly. "I'm sorry." No one answered. The music shifted to Fly Me to the Moon, but no one laughed anymore. They just watched me, waiting to see how I would leave. I turned away, kept my back straight, and walked slowly toward the hall. My eyes burned not from tears but from the lights. At my age, I'm used to being forgotten, but you never grow used to being humiliated. As I bent to pick up a napkin that had fallen beside a chair, something small rolled out of Camila's pocket, a silver USB drive. I glanced around. No one noticed. I picked it up and hid it in my palm. It was cold, sharp-edged, but carried a strange feeling as if fate were whispering. I walked past the foyer. Under the Ward's family portrait on the wall, Andrew and Camila smiling, and me at the edge, my hand on my son's shoulder. On the day we took that photo, Camila told me to step back so the light could focus on the newlyweds. I did step back, and from then on, I faded out of the frame of their lives. Outside, the wind slapped my face. Dry leaves swirled over the stone driveway. I opened the trunk of my beat-up car, sank into the seat, my hand still clenched around the USB in my coat pocket. In my head, the slap replayed in waves, along with my son's cold eyes. I started the engine. It coughed to life like the sigh of a tired old soul. The rearview mirror reflected my face, bruised and wrinkled, but my eyes were no longer wet. Something in me had shattered and awakened. On the drive home, city lights smeared red across the windshield, the color of the wine stain. I didn't know what was on that USB, but a gut feeling told me it might be the only weapon I had left. Back at my small apartment in Hartford, I sat down and exhaled a long breath. The wall clock ticked, the wind hissed through the window frame. I took the USB out and set it on the table, staring at it like a door opening over a chasm. I didn't know that in this tiny object hid a secret powerful enough to make the entire Ward family, from a haughty daughter-in-law to an ungrateful son, bow to the woman they had just shamed. And from that moment, I began my fight to reclaim the last thing I still owned, my dignity as a mother. I've lived long enough to know pain doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the very person you once cradled, the one you spent your youth protecting. I started nursing at 21. Mercy Hospital in Hartford was my second home, every day steeped in antiseptic and the clatter of rubber soles racing down white halls. I used to be proud I could stand 14 hours straight, no breaks, no complaints. When my husband, John, died in a car accident, Andrew was 12. I remember the night the police knocked, standing in the rain, hat soaked, and I knew the only thing left of my marriage was the ring on my hand. I didn't cry in front of Andrew. I held him and stroked his hair, telling him everything would be okay. The next day, I put on my white uniform and went back to the hospital like nothing had happened. I didn't have the right to fall apart because I was a mother. In the years that followed, I worked day shifts in the ER, then picked up nights in the recovery unit. Some mornings I got home before dawn, hands shaking with fatigue, but I still made breakfast. Andrew always waited in the kitchen, bright-eyed, showing me a test score or a picture he'd drawn. I used to tell him, "I don't have anything to leave you except opportunity, and I'll do everything to make sure you have it." And I did. When Andrew got into Yale for pharmacology, I could hardly believe my ears. But joy came with fear, tuition, housing, books, all far beyond what I had. I sold the ancestral house my grandparents left me in West Hartford, the home I was born in, where the kitchen always smelled like my mother's apple pie. I remember my hand shaking as I signed the papers, but I still smiled. I told myself, this isn't a loss, it's an investment in my son's future. We moved into a small rental barely big enough for the two of us. I worked myself ragged and sent Andrew extra money every month. When he graduated, I arrived early and sat in the back row wearing the oldest dress I owned. I watched my son in cap and gown, smiling like sunlight, and I thought it was all worth it. Then he started at a big pharma company in New York. He told me about projects, numbers, meetings I barely understood, but I listened anyway. If his voice sounded happy, my heart felt light. I thought after all those years, I'd finally gotten him to the far shore of life. Then Camila appeared. She was the only daughter of a wealthy healthcare investor, young, sharp, always knowing how to command attention. The first time we met, she reached for my hand with a perfect smile, but her eyes were cold and sizing me up. She said, "I've heard a lot about you from Andrew. You're really strong." I could hear that "you" land with distance, the way people talk about an old story that no longer concerns them. Their wedding was in Manhattan at a top-tier hotel. I was invited, but not to the head table. When the MC introduced the bride's parents and the groom's family, my name was barely mentioned in passing. People clapped. I clapped too, only my palms were icy. I'd hoped Camila would love Andrew the way I always had. But within months, I realized she didn't see me as family. One afternoon when I stopped by to visit, Camila stood on the stairs, voice gentle but razor-edged. "You should give us our space." I'm not used to living around working-class people. I thought I misheard, but Andrew, my son, just stood there with his head down, no defense, not even a sorry glance. I walked out of that house into a cold rain, but nothing felt as cold as inside me. I understood I'd lost my son not to death, but to class a divide I never imagined could split a family. I moved into a small third-floor walk-up in Hartford. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a window overlooking the parking lot. I kept my old habits: morning coffee, reading medical news to keep my mind sharp, waiting for Andrew's call. Some months he didn't call at all. Sometimes he texted, "Mom, you okay?" I replied, "I'm fine," even though I was only fine in the way someone used to loneliness keeps breathing. I still kept up with him from afar through press photos, industry news, their social media, Camila in expensive dresses, Andrew in a tailored suit, smiling among people I didn't know. Sometimes I still baked pumpkin pie and dropped it on their porch. I never got a thank you, but when I saw the box disappear on their security camera, my heart softened a little. Every year on Thanksgiving, I still set a table for one. I bought the smallest turkey and roasted it with rosemary like my mother did. I lit a candle, set my husband's picture on the table, and whispered, "At least you're still here." But this year, when Andrew called and said, "Mom, Camila wants you to come to the party for the sake of appearances," I smiled. I thought it was a small chance to heal. I didn't know it was a trap of fate the night my only son, who once promised to love Mom forever, would slap me across the face at the table. That night back at my apartment, the bruise on my cheek swelled. I looked at myself in the mirror, wrinkled skin, the gray hair, a woman who had saved hundreds of patients but couldn't save her own son's heart. I held an ice pack to my cheek. The sting spread, but the real pain sat in my chest. It wasn't the slap, it was the sense that part of my heart had died. I remembered when Andrew was little, running into my room at midnight afraid of the dark, and I would hold him and say, "I'm here, you're safe." Now I was the one who needed to hear it, and no one said a word. Outside, snow began to fall, flakes settling quietly on the black, cold street. I watched the traffic pass under yellow lights and realized, people can forget the debt they owe to a mother, but time forgets no one. It pays everything back in its own way. I sat in the empty room, listening to the fridge hum and my slow heartbeat. A tear slid down and touched the purple bruise, dissolving like a silent vow. I whispered, "If life is a piece of music, you chose to mute my part. But you'll hear it again soon, and this time, I'll be the one writing the melody." I didn't know that just hours later, when I plugged in the USB I'd picked up, everything would start to change forever. But at that moment, I was still just a mother forgotten, erased from her own story. I sat at my old computer, the one Andrew bought me over 10 years ago when he was in grad school. The screen was cloudy, the keys heavy, the fan whirring like an old soul's sigh. I slid the silver USB into the port and heard a small click in the quiet room. My heart thumped, as if I were breaking into a world not meant for me. A folder appeared. No photos, no videos, just Excel sheets and PDFs with dry file names. Trans, reports, June, XLSX. Confidential, accounts, Europe, PDF. Internal, fund, transfer, records, XLS. I opened one at random. Columns of numbers filled the screen, rows stretching forever. Even after years away from the hospital, my mind was still sharp for irregularities. Monthly transfers appeared from an account labeled Ward Pharmaceuticals Research Fund to a string of accounts overseas in Switzerland, Luxembourg, and one unfamiliar name, Velasca Medical Holdings. I frowned. That research fund belonged to Andrew's company. I remembered Andrew once said, "Mom, I'm running a cancer drug research fund. Camila handles the finances, she's got an MBA. But those sums weren't small, over $2 million in 6 months. I opened more files. There were piles of documents signed Camila Ward, CFO, along with transaction records tagged with security codes. A hidden folder named Private contained stock transfer contracts and internal emails between Camila and a familiar name, Vincent Devereaux, CEO of Velasca Pharmaceuticals, Andrew's direct competitor. One terse, icy email made my blood run cold. Once the shares are transferred, Velasca will merge. My family will take control. Andrew doesn't need to know until it's too late. I held my breath, feeling like I'd just read my son's death sentence. Each word was a blade. Camila hadn't just betrayed Andrew, she was quietly destroying his entire company to sell it to her own family. I pushed back from the desk, heart racing. In my mind, the wine-soaked white dress flashed again. What was ruined was worthless compared to what she was doing. And my son's slap, only the result of a perfectly staged scene directed by Camila. I sat still, the screen glowing. I couldn't take this to Andrew. If Camila could deceive at this level, she surely controlled all his channels of information. I needed someone who could bring the truth into the light carefully. The first name that came to mind was Clara Vaughn. Clara had been an investigative reporter at the Boston Globe. 10 years ago, she was in a car accident and brought to my hospital. I was on the night shift. I personally helped save her life after emergency surgery for massive blood loss. After that, Clara would send thank you cards every Christmas, but we lost touch for years. I looked up her old number in my contacts. My finger shook as I dialed. 3 rings. Then a familiar female voice came on. Clara Vaughn speaking. I took a deep breath. "Clara, this is Helen Ward, the head nurse at Mercy who cared for you after your accident in 2013. There was a brief silence, then her voice warmed, cautious but kind. "Helen." "Oh my God, I still have your thank you card. How are you? What's going on?" "Clara, I need to talk to you, not about medicine. It's about financial crimes, and maybe my son's life." She went quiet for a few seconds. I heard the scratch of a pen. "Where are you?" "A small apartment in Hartford. I have data, evidence, but I don't know what to do." Clara's voice dropped, serious. "Do not send anything online. Don't tell anyone, not even family. I'll arrange someone to meet you. And Helen, stay quiet. We need more proof." After the call, I sat still for a long time. The room suddenly felt colder, with only the pale blue from the screen reflecting on my face. I understood that from this moment on, I wasn't the humiliated old mother anymore. I was stepping into a dangerous game, one where I had to face my daughter-in-law, someone smart and ruthless enough to make my son believe she was an angel. I opened a drawer and took out another USB drive. I backed up all the data onto it and labeled it with a marker, "Financial reports, hidden." Then I grabbed my coat, slipped the original USB into an envelope, and drove out. A light rain fell over Hartford that night. Streetlights scattered across the wet pavement like shards of broken glass. I drove to the office of attorney George Miller, an old friend of my husband's. George had been corporate counsel for the hospital, careful, discreet, and principled. When John died, George handled the probate, and I always knew he kept a private safe at his office. By the time I arrived, the clock read 10 p.m. The lights were still on. George opened the door, eyes wide. "Helen? My God, it's been over 10 years. What's going on?" I took off my hat. My raincoat was soaked. "I need you to hold something important. Don't ask, just put it in your safe and don't open it unless I say so." George studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I owe your husband a favor. I'll do it." I set the envelope on his desk. "If anything happens to me, send this to Clara Vaughn at the Boston Globe." Worry flickered in George's eyes, but he didn't press. He opened the safe, placed the envelope in a separate compartment, locked it, then squeezed my shoulder. "You're as strong as ever, Helen, but be careful. Their world is nothing like ours." I gave a tired smile. "I know, but sometimes it's the outsiders who see whose hands are truly dirty." Back home, I flipped on the kitchen light and made a cup of chamomile tea. Outside, the rain kept falling. On the table, the second USB lay still, catching the warm glow from the little lamp. I thought about Andrew. Did he have any idea that the wife he trusted was cutting away, day by day, at everything I'd spent my life helping him build? I pressed a hand to my cheek, where the bruise had started to change color. The ache was still there, but this time, I didn't feel weak. I felt clear. Amid the rain and the rising steam, an idea took shape. I wouldn't call the police. I wouldn't make noise. I would strike back on my terms. I opened my old notebook and wrote a few lines. November 25th. Begin. No longer the weak mother, no longer the one who gets slapped. Then I closed the notebook, set it beside the USB, and shut my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt the trembling inside me go still. Only a fire remained low but steady burning. And I knew that from that night on, nothing in the Ward family would ever be the same. Because this time, the forgotten old mother had found her voice, and it would silence them all. The next morning, I woke as the first sunlight slipped through the curtains. The small room was awash in winter's pale gold, so quiet I could hear the clock hands crawl. On the table, last night's tea was still warm, and the USB beside it sat like a reminder that everything had begun to change. But in the midst of all the planning, one thought wouldn't leave me: Sophie, my granddaughter. She was only 8, with star-bright brown eyes, the only one in that house who had ever hugged me without it being for show. I remembered mornings I took her to preschool, how she'd sit on my lap in the back seat, singing little songs and asking, "Grandma, why is your hair white but you're still my favorite to hug?" I used to think a child's love was the purest thing, and I couldn't believe even that love had been bent by Camila. Around late morning, I decided to drive to Andrew's house. I had no grand plan, just wanted to drop off some homemade cookies for Sophie, like I did on weekends. I figured no matter how much Camila despised me, a child still had a right to be loved. The road to their private community ran up a hill between 2 rows of bare maples, a high iron gate with an automated security system where outsiders had to buzz and wait for approval. I carried a carefully wrapped bag of cookies in my tote, wearing an old gray coat and the wool scarf Sophie had knitted for me at 6. I rang the bell. A soft beep sounded. Then the guard's voice crackled through the speaker. "Can I help you?" "This is Helen Ward," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Andrew's mother. I'm here to see my granddaughter, Sophie." A pause. Then a curt reply. "Sorry, Mrs. Ward, you're not on today's guest list." I faltered. "I won't stay long, just want to drop off some cookies." "I'm her grandmother, you know that." The guard's voice was flat, mechanical. "I only follow instructions. Please leave, or I'll have to contact the homeowner." I clenched the handles of the basket, swallowing the humiliation rising in my throat. Then the inner wooden door swung open. Camila stepped out in a cream silk dress, blonde hair falling loose, a coffee cup in hand. She didn't look surprised. She only curled her lips slightly, voice sweet as sugar, but each word falling like ice. "Oh, Mrs. Helen, you still don't get it? We don't want our daughter growing up around clumsy people." Each word squeezed my throat. "Camila, I just want a few minutes with Sophie. I'm her grandmother." She shrugged, eyeing the cookie bag like it was dirty. "Grandmother? That's funny. Someone who spilled wine on her mother's dress and made her father lose face in front of dozens of guests. Do you think she'd be proud of you? Andrew's trying to keep our reputation intact. Don't make it harder." I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Andrew appeared behind her. My son wore a gray suit, phone in hand, face blank. Our eyes met for a split second. I wanted to see mercy, a flicker of regret, but there was only emptiness. Camila murmured, just loud enough for me to hear, "Say something." Andrew took a breath, and without a word shut the gate. The clang of iron sounded like a verdict. I stood there holding the basket, my heart heavy as stone. A cold gust lifted the scarf around my neck, the one Sophie knit for me. She'd said, "So you won't be cold waiting at the school gate." Now I was still at a gate, but hers and I was cold to the bone. I turned the car around without looking back. The descent blurred in mist. The tires slid a little over dry leaves. Each yard I drove felt like a year taken off my life. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, letting the moon spill a thin silver over old keepsakes, Andrew's graduation photo, my 25 years of service plaque, and the wooden box of old files I'd kept in the closet for years. I opened the box. Inside were the traces of a life given to a son, Yale tuition bills, the savings account I emptied to cover his first loan, and the mortgage papers for the ancestral house I signed with a shaking hand. I turned each page, the smell of old paper mixed with dust and tears. Every number was a witness to 14-hour days, skipped meals, sleepless nights so Andrew could build a career. Ward Pharmaceuticals, the company he ran, wasn't just his ward. It was mine. It was sweat, tears, and the youth I traded away. I set the stack down, my fingers whitening at the edges. A sharp feeling rose, not humiliation anymore, but clarity. I had been erased from the legacy I helped create. I had been pushed out of the home these hands once built. But now, with the evidence on that USB, I knew I still had one thing they didn't: the truth. I took the USB from the drawer and plugged it in again. This time, I opened each file, reading slowly, marking key points. I wasn't trembling anymore. All the fear had cooled into resolve. A little after 11 p.m., I picked up the phone and called Clara. Her voice came through a bit hoarse, probably still at the office. "Helen, I was just about to call you. I reviewed the copies you sent. This is bigger than I thought. If it holds, Camila is committing international money laundering." I was silent for a moment, then answered, "You're right. But I don't want to destroy the company, I just want the truth seen. I want Andrew to know who he's living with." Clara's voice went low. "Then we need a careful release. No fireworks, or Camila will have time to scrub the matter. Trail." I glanced at the moonlight spread across the paper-laden table and said slowly, every word clear, "Clara, I've already lost everything. My name, my son, my family. All I have left is Ward. It's time they learn what that name truly stands for." Silence on the line. Then Clara's voice, steady and firm. "Okay, Helen. We'll do it your way." After hanging up, I stared at the computer a long while. The transaction sheet still filled the screen columns of numbers like heartbeats. I knew each line was another cut Camila had made into my son's trust. I printed everything, sealed it in an envelope, and carefully taped it shut. In the corner, I wrote with a slightly shaky hand, Ward, truth. Then I leaned back and took a deep breath. Outside, the rain turned soft, but to me it sounded like an overture. I knew the road ahead would be hard. Camila was clever. Andrew was blind. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. Because now I had something they couldn't buy, steal, or stamp out: the truth and a mother's resolve. I closed my eyes, listened to the rain tapping the eaves, and told myself, they shoved me from their door, but I'll return, not to beg my way in, but to knock on the door of justice. And so, in the quiet winter night, my plan to strike back officially began, not with violence, not with hate, but with the light of truth. In the days after, the air in my apartment grew quieter than ever. Everything looked the same, the old clock ticking in slow beats, the teapot still holding a whisper of chamomile, but inside me, a low fire burned. Not wild, not flaring, just spreading like banked embers waiting for a breath. Clara went to work. She said little, but I knew she worked day and night. I received short, coded texts. I'm tracking the money. Found 2 intermediaries. Don't use email. Clara was the kind of person I always trusted. Calm, sharp, and relentlessly ethical. I understood that behind each brief message were hours of digging, verifying, and maybe danger. As for me, I played my part pretending to be weak. I handwrote a letter to Camila. My script shook like that of a truly apologetic old mother. Camila, I know I embarrassed you at the Thanksgiving party. I won't make excuses. I only hope you'll forgive me. If possible, I just want to see Sophie, even for a few minutes. I promise not to bother you or Andrew again. Thank you for letting me keep the Ward name, Helen. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and mailed it. I knew Camila well. Someone like her wouldn't miss a chance to flaunt power, especially when she believed the other person had knelt. 3 days later, I received a reply. The paper smelled of expensive perfume. Every letter was carefully formed. Mrs. Helen, I received your letter. But you misunderstand. We don't forgive people who damage our family's reputation. If you truly want to make amends, do the right thing. Stay silent. And instead of thanking us for allowing you to keep the Ward name, you should be grateful we still let you have it. Camila Ward. I finished reading and set the letter on the table. I wasn't angry. I simply smiled, the smile of someone who finally sees the other's true nature. She still thought she was winning, and I, with all the calm I had, let her believe it. While Camila reveled in her sense of control, Clara followed the money. She uncovered dozens of transactions routed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands, all authorized by Camila under the label International Research Investments. But what stunned Clara was that those accounts matched a chain tied to Velasca Pharmaceuticals, the very competitor Camila was colluding with. I remember the day Clara called, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and tension. Helen, we've got it all. Forged contracts, money laundering transfers, even emails between Camila and Vincent. We just need one final confirmation from an inside source, and we're set. I was quiet for a moment, then answered softly, Good. But be patient a little longer. Let them think I've forgotten everything. In the days that followed, I lived as usual, morning coffee, afternoon walks around the lake, evening news on TV. But inside, I was counting down. I knew Clara was preparing the exposé, and when she told me the title, my heart clenched. The White Queen of Ward Pharmaceuticals. A perfect headline, regal and cold, just like Camila. Clara said the piece would run after legal review, and the editorial team at the Boston Globe was keeping it strictly confidential. I only nodded and said quietly, Do it. No concessions. About 2 weeks later, a brief phone call made my heart race. Andrew was just summoned by the IRS, Clara said. They found anomalies in the research fund and are asking him to cooperate. Camila was with him, but she didn't look good. I think she's starting to get scared. I sat still for a long time, teacup in hand. Dim light fell through the window and shimmered on the ripples in the cup. I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else, no one can outrun the truth forever. I didn't want Andrew to suffer, but some lessons can only be learned by losing everything. The son who slapped me over a dress was about to learn what a real stain looks like. That afternoon I called Clara. My voice was low, steady as a lake before a storm. "It's time, Clara." "Start." "On the other end," she said. "I understand." The call ended short, like a vow. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. A thin veil of clouds signaled rain. I made coffee, opened my computer, and saw my inbox flooded with alerts from the Boston Globe, Reuters, Bloomberg. A bold headline filled the screen: "The White Queen of Ward Pharmaceuticals, behind the curtain of a billion-dollar lie." The cover image was Camila, in a glamorous white dress, a sweet smile with cold eyes. Below were documents, charts, evidence, and email threads she sent to the Velasca group. Clara had done a flawless job, enough facts, solid proof, and not a single error. Social media exploded. The pharmaceutical world reeled. Ward Pharmaceuticals stock plunged. Major outlets ran the story, while the name Camila Ward flooded every front page as a symbol of betrayal and greed. I sat still, watching the lines of text scroll by. Outside, rain began to fall, each drop tapping the window frame like justice knocking at the door. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt lighter, as if a weight had finally lifted off my chest after years of pressure. On the table, Camila's handwritten letter still lingered, the perfume faint but present. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and fed it to a burning candle. The paper curled, caught, and the ink turned to ash. I spoke softly, calm and even. "Thank you, Camila. Without your contempt, I might never have found myself again." I still remember the moment the flames swallowed that letter, no bitterness left, only peace. What about you? If it were you, would you be brave enough to burn the past that hurt you? Share your thoughts below. I want to know whether you would choose forgiveness or silence. Outside, the rain grew heavier, but inside me, that hidden fire burned brighter, stronger, and now nothing could put it out. The next morning when I got out of bed, the world seemed different. Not because of the weather, but because of the dense headlines on every page. I poured a cup of coffee, turned on the TV, and the first thing I saw crawling across the screen was Ward Pharmaceuticals, suspected of money laundering and stock fraud. The FBI officially involved. The anchor's voice was even, but icy. Internal sources report illicit financial transactions spanning over a year, linked to research funds and international share transfers. The suspected mastermind is Camila Ward, Chief Financial Officer and wife of CEO Andrew Ward. I watched the footage: Camila in a white suit hurrying out of a building, 2 investigators flanking her. Camera flashes popping non-stop. The once sleek blonde hair now in disarray, a carefully made-up face gone pale under the lights. She tried to smile, but fear had already taken her eyes. I took a deep breath, tightening my grip on the mug. Everything was moving faster than I'd imagined. An empire once praised as a model of the industry was collapsing in a matter of days. Online, people shared the images of Camila being escorted out, some mocking, some shocked, some saying, "In the end, justice always finds the right address." As for me, I just sat there, watching headline after headline, my heart aching and easing at the same time. Andrew appeared in the next segment. He wasn't arrested, but he was summoned to cooperate. Seeing my son's face on the screen made my heart twist pale, exhausted, stripped of his usual confidence. His eyes drifted when a reporter asked, "Did you know anything about your wife's transactions?" Andrew only shook his head and hurried into the car without answering. I knew that in that moment, the reputation he had spent years building was melting away like sea foam. That afternoon, Clara called me. "The news is moving faster than we expected," she said, her voice hoarse after long hours. "The press is tracking every step. But brace yourself, Helen. Camila will come for you." I listened to the rain ticking against the window. "She won't back down, will she?" "No," Clara said. "Someone like Camila doesn't understand losing. When everything slips away, she'll look for someone to blame, and that someone will be you." I gave a faint smile. "I'm ready." Sometimes silence is the best armor. That night, I left the TV off. I sat in the living room with only the table lamp on. Warm, dim light settled over the small space, quiet as a lake before a storm. Then the phone rang. On the screen was a name I didn't think I'd see again, Camila Ward. I let it ring a few more beats before answering. Her voice came through hoarse, still trying to sound haughty. "You think you've won, Helen?" I didn't reply. I only listened to her ragged breathing. "You think a few papers and numbers can destroy me? You have no idea what I can do. If I go down, Andrew goes down with me. I'll drag him under." Her voice shook rage and desperation. I set down my teacup and answered slowly, each word clear. "Camila, I didn't strike you. I only removed the mask so the light could shine in. You're the one destroying yourself." Silence on the other end. Then a dry laugh like breaking glass. "Light, huh? You don't get it, Helen. Light can burn the weak like you." "I used to be weak," I said quietly, "but only when I believed you had a heart." I hung up. The room fell quiet again, the steady rain drumming on the roof. I sat there a long time. In the dark, I caught my reflection in the window, silver hair, deep eyes, a face lined with age but strangely serene. I was no longer the woman slapped at a dinner table. I had become someone who could look straight at the truth without trembling. The next morning, Clara called back. "You were right," she said, her voice moved and impressed. "I listened to the recording you sent. What you said is powerful. The editors want to use it for a special interview on the case. Do you agree?" I was surprised. "A recording? You recorded that call?" "Yes. I had our security system automatically capture any suspicious communications. And Helen, your line cut through the dark like a knife." I was quiet for a moment, then nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "If it helps people understand that truth is never the enemy, then do it." 2 days later, the interview went live. The cover showed my friend face, an older woman with a steady gaze over the bold headline, "I didn't strike anyone. I only removed the mask so the light could shine in. Helen Ward." That line swept across social media. Thousands of comments appeared. "She's a role model for everyone who's been silenced. You don't need power. Truth alone can bring liars down." I read the messages, and a familiar yet strange feeling rose, not pride, but peace. I'd worked in a hospital all my life, seen so many life and death moments, but never as clearly as now. Sometimes justice doesn't need a shout, just the patience of light. That afternoon, I stepped onto the porch and saw the rain had stopped. The clouds split, revealing a silver-gray sky after the storm. A few kids biked past laughing, unaware that somewhere an empire had fallen. In my coat pocket was the old letter from Camila, the part that hadn't burned. I pulled it out and dropped it into the rainwater along the curb. The paper drifted, bled out, and disappeared. I spoke softly, to myself or maybe to my late husband. "John, do you see? In the end, the truth still finds its way." A light breeze carried the smell of wet earth and a hint of wildflowers. I lifted my head, feeling my heart grow lighter, not because I'd won, but because justice had breathed again after years underground. And I knew my journey wasn't over, but at least tonight, I could sleep no longer afraid of the dark, because I had learned to light myself. Rain had started in mid-afternoon, the heavy, stubborn kind of an East Coast winter. Drops drummed against the old window frame, each tap like a knock from memory. I sat in the living room, tea going cold, watching streaks of water slide down the glass. Inside, Everything had settled after days of chaos news, headlines, Camila's call fading into a quiet that mixed with fatigue. I thought the evening would pass like any other until there was a knock at the door. 3 hard, urgent raps, louder than the rain on the porch. I startled. I rarely had visitors at this hour. I stood, pulled on a sweater, and opened the door. There, in the white curtain of rain, Andrew stood before me. His shirt was soaked, hair a mess, eyes red. Rain beat against his shoulders, no umbrella, no words, just standing there. I let out a slow breath, my hand still on the knob. "Andrew." He looked up, his voice raw. "Mom, how could you do this? How could you destroy my work?" I went still. That question, that tone, dragged me back to Thanksgiving night, the same voice, the same coldness, when his hand came down on my face. But this time, his eyes weren't proud. They shook, like a lost child finding his way home. I spoke slowly, low but firm. "No, Andrew, I didn't destroy anything." I pulled down the curtain. "You let someone else destroy your own name." He shook his head and stepped inside. "You don't understand, Mom. The whole company, hundreds of people work under me. Now everything's collapsing. My shares are wiped out. The press is swarming. What am I supposed to do?" "You're asking the wrong person." I turned away, walked to the table, and set a dry towel in his hand. "You should be asking why the wife you keep protecting is the one who pushed you to this point." Andrew tossed the towel onto the chair, voice rising. "Camila says you hate her. You want revenge. You gave fake documents to the press." I turned back and looked him straight in the eye. The warm lamplight hid his face, pale, exhausted, still clinging to blind belief. "Andrew, all these years you've never asked me one honest question. You only listen to what others say about me. Now let me ask you, do you truly believe Camila is innocent?" He stayed quiet, but his eyes wavered. I stepped closer, softening my tone. "Son, you used to trust data, evidence, numbers, right? Then look at this." I opened the drawer, took out the backup USB drive, and set it on the table. Its silver glint caught the light. "Everything is in here. Forged contracts, transfers, correspondence between Camila and the Velasca Group. All of it. I kept a copy because I knew one day you'd need it." Andrew looked at the USB, his hand trembling slightly. "Mom, how did you get it?" I gave a sad smile. "On Thanksgiving night when you slapped me, I bent to pick up the napkin and saw it fall from Camila's purse. Maybe fate chose me to open your eyes." He picked up the USB, still doubtful. But I could see a flicker of fear, the kind that comes when someone starts to see the truth. "You can look at it here. No one's going to hurt you." Andrew sat down and plugged the USB into his laptop. The screen lit up. I stood quietly in the corner, listening to the rain outside blend with the soft clicks of his mouse. The small room filled only with my son's heavy breathing each time he opened another file. He opened the first email, "Camila to Vincent Devereaux," signed, he didn't suspect a thing. Next came the share transfer agreements, hidden transaction sheets, lists of foreign accounts. All carried Andrew Ward's digital signature. I saw his shoulders shake. "No, no way. She told me these were just research collaboration proxies." Andrew's voice faltered, his eyes widened, his face drained. He scrolled faster, then stopped. On the screen was a note. "His mother is old. When this is done, I'll put her in a luxury nursing home in California. She can be happy there without bothering anyone." Andrew gripped the mouse, let his hand fall limp, then shot to his feet. My God, I saw the first drop hit the keyboard, whether a tear or rain from his still wet shirt. I couldn't tell. "Mom," he rasped, "she made me sign. She said it was just tax procedure. I didn't read closely. God, how foolish I've been." He dropped to his knees in front of me, his choking sobs, blended with the rain outside. "I'm sorry, Mom. I shamed you. I hurt you and myself. I don't deserve forgiveness. I looked at my grown son, the pride of my life now, a lost child again. The anger in me melted away, leaving only a deep, aching tenderness. I crouched, placed my hand on his shoulder, and whispered like a breeze, "Son, now do you know how much that slap hurt?" Andrew looked up, eyes flooded. "I do, Mom. It's not just physical pain. It's when the person you love most shatters your heart." I nodded and pulled him into my arms. His body shook, like the little boy who once fell off his bike, and I bandaged his knees. I caught the familiar warmth, his hair scented with rain and tears. "It's okay," I whispered. "What matters is you woke up." Outside, the rain kept falling, but it no longer felt heavy. The warm light in the room softened, reflecting across our faces. I knew there would be long days ahead, investigations, court, the media, but in that moment, I felt at peace. The son I thought I'd lost had come back not in glory but in truth. I smoothed Andrew's hair and murmured, "Now stand up. The rain will stop, and we're still mother and son." He squeezed my hand and nodded. Looking out the window through the still, steady rain, I saw not two broken people in the glass, but two souls who had found each other again in the storm. The morning of the first hearing arrived with a knife-edged January cold. I woke early, poured a cup of coffee, and sat quietly watching gray clouds slide past the window. The air in my apartment was thick, tense, and still the hush before a wave I knew was coming today. When I stepped into the federal courthouse in Hartford, the air held polished wood and fresh ink. People moved slowly. Every footstep echoed off the stone walls. The courtroom was packed with reporters, cameras, lawyers, and onlookers. Every eye was on the woman in the defendant's chair, Camila Ward. She was still beautiful, though visibly worn down. The familiar white suit only made her skin look paler. Under harsh lights, heavy makeup couldn't hide the dark circles or ashen lips. But her gaze hadn't changed, arrogant, icy, refusing to lose. I sat in the third row behind the barrier, facing her. Andrew sat beside me, hands clenched, occasionally trembling. I laid my hand over his, the way I used to when he was little and afraid of shots. The judge entered. The gavel struck. "This court convenes to try the defendant, Camila Ward, on charges of money laundering, falsifying financial records, and corporate corruption. Court is in session." The prosecutor read the indictment. His voice was even, but each sentence cut the air. The defendant used her position as chief financial officer to execute more than 43 illegal transactions, transferring nearly $18 million to offshore accounts through Ward Pharmaceuticals Research Fund. Additionally, the defendant forged contracts and coerced her husband to sign authorizations to legitimize the scheme. Behind us, cameras flashed non-stop. Camila sat straight-backed, chin lifted, lips slightly curled as if every accusation were a joke. Then her attorney stood, voice clear and brimming with confidence. "Your Honor, this entire case is the product of personal malice. Mrs. Helen Ward, my client's mother-in-law, fabricated and altered documents to smear Camila due to family conflict. We have proof that Mrs. Helen supplied information to reporter Clara Vaughn, who published a story that severely damaged Ward's reputation." Whispers rippled through the room. I kept my eyes on Camila. She turned, looked at me, and let a cold smile pass her lips. "See, everyone knows you hate me. You're just a jealous old mother, bitter about her daughter-in-law's life." I didn't answer. George Miller, an old friend and my attorney, stood. He nodded to the judge and stepped to the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor, we present rebuttal evidence. Please play the video from the USB provided by my client, Mrs. Helen Ward." The room dimmed as the large screen came on. A clear recording appeared. Camila in her office, signing a stack of documents. A date stamp in the corner. June 15th of last year. Next, security footage from the company's mail server emails sent from camila.ward@wardpharma.com with detailed instructions for international research reinvestment transfers. George turned back to Camila. "Do you deny these are your signatures and your emails?" Camila said nothing, her face draining. Then she shot to her feet, snapping, "I was set up, the video is edited. My mother-in-law has hated me for years, she fabricated everything." The judge motioned her to sit. George continued, "Your Honor, we also have a witness." He looked toward the gallery. "Andrew Ward, please." Andrew stood. I noticed his hands tremble, but his eyes were steady. He took the oath, then faced the bench. "I'm Andrew Ward, CEO of Ward Pharmaceuticals. I confirm that what the court saw is real." My wife, Camila, asked me to sign contracts she described as administrative paperwork. I didn't read them carefully. My mother discovered the irregularities, gathered the evidence, and contacted a reporter to investigate. Without her, the company and I would have been destroyed. The courtroom fell silent. I saw Camila's lips pressed tight, her jaw shaking. A reporter snapped furiously, flashes popping across the room. The judge looked toward the gallery. "Mrs. Helen Ward, the court thanks you for supplying evidence that brought this to light. Do you wish to say anything?" I stood. My voice was low and steady, but it carried through the hush. "I don't want anyone to suffer, not even Camila. I only want the truth to be seen. When truth is buried, trust dies with it." A few heads bowed. I spotted Clara in the last row, eyes wet but bright. The judge brought down the gavel. "The court finds the defendant, Camila Ward, guilty of money laundering, falsifying financial records, and corporate corruption. Sentence: 12 years in prison, forfeiture of all illicit assets, and a ban from holding any financial office in any organization for 20 years. The words rang out, bouncing off the walls. The room stirred. Cameras flashed again. Camila sat frozen for a few seconds, then let out a brittle laugh. As two officers approached, she stood, hair falling across her face, a twisted smile on her lips. She turned to me, voice raw. "You won, Helen. Are you satisfied now?" I looked at her for a long time. No anger, no grudge, only a young woman consumed by her own ambition. I answered softly, loud enough to carry through the stillness. "No, Camila. I didn't win. Only the truth did." She stumbled, eyes flickering. Then they led her away. When the courtroom doors closed, I stayed seated, listening to the footsteps fade. Andrew sank into the chair beside me, head bowed. I placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling his warmth for the first time in years. "Mom," he whispered, voice tight, "thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled, looking up at the skylight where light filtered through. "Son, I never wanted to beat anyone. I just wanted you to learn one thing. Truth always finds its way, even if it has to walk through hell." Outside, snow began to fall. White flakes drifted past the window and melted on the cold wood frame. I breathed in, letting the chill fill my chest, and felt myself ease. After so many years, justice finally had a voice. Not a shout, just the quiet of people who have found peace in the truth. In the days after the hearing, the city seemed to slow. Hartford's sky wasn't as bleak, snow-blanketed roofs and streets, making everything strangely calm. But inside me was a vague, empty space, a feeling of release mixed with ache. Maybe no one truly wins after a war inside a family. One morning, as I was making coffee, the mailman knocked. He handed me a cream envelope with neat, careful handwriting I recognized at once. "Andrew." I stood a long time just looking at it. It had been years since my son wrote me a letter by hand. I opened it. The smell of fresh paper blended with the coffee. "Mom, I don't know where to start." Any apology now feels small. I lived too long in the shadow of my pride and lost what mattered most, your trust and your love. I don't dare ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying to make things right. I've resigned from the company, sold the house in Greenwich, and I'm looking for a small apartment near Sophie's school to start over. I want to teach her to live by conscience, not by reputation. You once said the worst pain isn't the slap, it's when the person you love turns away. Now I understand that better than anyone. If possible, I ask for one chance to make amends, even if it's just to visit you once and apologize in person. Your son, Andrew. The lines blurred with tears. I set the letter down and pressed a hand to my chest. Something inside me cracked and healed. I didn't sob, just let the tears fall slowly, like coffee drops hitting the bottom of a cup, strong, hot, real. I sat by the window watching the snow melt in the Sunday. The letter lay on the table. I read it again and again until I knew every curve of his handwriting. Then I folded it, put it in a drawer, and didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I wanted Andrew to walk his path on his own. Forgiveness isn't a sentence, it's a long enough silence for someone to learn to understand. A few days later, Clara called. Her voice was bright like morning light. Helen, have you seen the news? My new piece is on the front page of the New York Times today. The title is The Mother Who Fought Back. I froze. The mother who fought back? Yes. Clara laughed. I have no idea how many people you've inspired. The whole country is talking about you. I've never seen so many letters and emails of thanks. I opened my computer. The screen lit up with an old photo of me in a hospital corridor, white nurse uniform, hair in a bun, a tired face with bright eyes. Below was the bold headline, "The woman who stood up when the world told her to be quiet." I read Clara's lines. Helen Ward had no power, no wealth, no fame. She had one belief, that truth, even when buried under layers of lies, will find the light. She didn't fight for vengeance. She fought to reclaim her dignity, and for every woman who's been dismissed and pushed to the margins. The piece spread fast. I received hundreds of letters, emails, and messages from everywhere. California, Texas, Florida, even far-off rural towns. An elderly woman named Marjorie wrote, "I'm 72. I lived my whole life in the shadow of my husband and my children. But after reading your story, I stood up and went to the bank to open my first account." Another woman, Mrs. Thompson in Tennessee, included a photo of herself smiling and holding the lawsuit she filed against her son for taking her property. She wrote simply, "Because of you, I know I'm not crazy." I was just silent for too long. I read every letter, some scrawled, some shaky with age, and some with only one sentence. "Thank you, Helen." Each line felt like another heartbeat syncing with mine, women I'd never met, sharing the same pain and the same journey to find themselves again. That night, I opened my old journal, the one I used to write in during overnight shifts at the hospital. The paper had yellowed, the cover was worn, but the ink still carried a faint scent. I picked up a pen and wrote my first lines in years. March 14th. I used to be a nurse. I used to be dismissed, yelled at, ordered around like I was invisible. But today, I am Helen Ward, the woman who reclaimed her own dignity. I didn't defeat anyone. I just stood up in a world that kept telling me to sit down. And now I understand. The greatest victory isn't making someone fall, it's learning to stand firm without asking anyone's permission. I set the pen down and looked at the page where the ink was still wet. Outside, the snow had stopped, and a light breeze carried in the damp scent of earth and wood. I closed the journal, leaned back in my chair, and shut my eyes. In the dark of that small room, faces rose up: my husband, Andrew, even Camila, people who had passed through my life, leaving wounds but also lessons. And I knew everything that happened had led me here, not a woman shaking in the echo of someone else's derisive laughter, but someone who knows the value of silence, resolve, and truth. Late that night, I stepped onto the balcony. Moonlight stretched across the snow, reflecting softly through the glass. I pulled Andrew's envelope from my coat pocket, opened it, and read it once more. Then I set it by the window to let the moonlight wash over it. I whispered, as much to myself as to every woman who'd ever been forgotten, "We don't need anyone to save us. We just need to stop asking permission to live as ourselves." And in that moment I felt a strange calm. No more hatred, no more bitterness. Just a lightness like dawn after a storm when the first light touches my hands, warm, true, and clear. I smiled. For the first time in years, Helen Ward felt free. A year passed. Spring skies in Connecticut were clear as freshly washed glass, and I remember that morning well, the morning I held the deed to my old house in my hands. I stood in the yard, looking at brick walls faded by time. Moss clung to the porch, and the wood windows still leaned into the sun like the day I left. It had been years since I sold this house to help Andrew build Ward Pharmaceuticals. And now, with the settlement from the lawsuit and what I had left in savings, I had bought back the place where everything began. No one can predict the turn of fate. Some things we lose never return, but some places wait for us patient as forgiveness. I walked slowly through the backyard where the lavender bushes had dried to husks, yet still released a faint scent when the wind passed. By the old fence, the apple tree Andrew and I planted when he was in grade school still stood. A few branches had broken, the trunk was rough, but the roots held deep, stubborn, and strong, proof of time's endurance. I was lost in thought when a familiar voice rang out, "Grandma! Grandma! I found a rabbit!" Sophie's voice was as bright as little bells. I turned to see her running across the grass, blonde curls flying in the wind. Andrew followed behind with a paint bucket and some tools. The scene made me smile. A year ago, I wouldn't have dared to imagine seeing my son and granddaughter in this old yard again, but today, among peeling walls and overgrown grass, my family felt close, not a memory, but the present. Andrew set the bucket on the porch. "Mom, I bought new paint. We'll start with the living room walls." I nodded. "Okay, let's save the kitchen for later. I want it to keep the smell of cinnamon and pumpkin." Sophie ran over and hugged me, hands covered in dirt. "Can I plant flowers here, Grandma? I want our garden to have lots of purple ones." I bent down and wiped her hands. "Of course, sweetheart. Here, you can plant anything you want. This is our home." Laughter floated up, light as sunlight through leaves. I watched my two loved ones repaint the walls, the brush sounds mixing with birdsong on the roof. Peace threaded into my breathing. By late afternoon, the light slanted gold across the porch. I set the old wooden table in the backyard, the same spot where we used to have Thanksgiving when Andrew was little. The smell of fresh pumpkin pie filled the air, bringing back so many holidays when I was the busy woman in Fide. A small kitchen who hadn't yet met loneliness. Andrew wiped his hands and sat across from me. A few white paint specks dotted his face. His hair was messy, but in his eyes there was a light I hadn't seen in a long time. Peace. "Mom," he said softly, "thank you for saving me." I placed a slice of pie on his plate and looked at my son for a long moment. "No, Andrew," I answered gently. "I didn't save anyone. I just helped you see yourself." He lowered his head, silent. A breeze scattered lavender petals across the table, sparkling in the evening Sunday. I watched Sophie race around the yard, holding a paintbrush like a magic wand, laughing out loud. "Grandma, I'm done. Our house is the most beautiful in the world." I laughed, my voice carried by the wind. "Yes, sweetheart, our house is beautiful." In that moment, I thought maybe happiness isn't something flashy or extravagant like people say. Maybe it's simply returning to where it once hurt the most and finding your heart no longer trembles. When night fell, we sat at the small kitchen table we'd just painted. The room glowed warm under the soft lamp, the pumpkin pie scent mingling with cinnamon and vanilla. I poured red wine into 3 glasses, 2 for us, and grape juice in the small one for Sophie. "Tonight no one's spilling wine," I joked with a wink. Andrew burst out laughing, the first real laugh I'd heard from him in years. It wasn't forced, and it wasn't weighed down by regret. Sophie giggled and raised her glass like a grown-up. "Cheers!" We clinked. The crystal ring sounded like the first note of a new chapter. I looked at my son. His face was bright in the lamplight, not with the shine of success, but with the calm of someone who's found peace. I said softly, "Andrew, I've always believed anyone can lose their way. What matters is whether they have the courage to come back." He nodded. "I wasted so much time, Mom." I smiled, gazing out at the crescent moon peeking through the apple branches. "It's okay, son. That apple tree lost branches too, but this year it still bloomed." Andrew took my hand. His grip was firm and warm, nothing like the day he bowed his head in tears in my apartment last year. Sophie climbed into my lap and whispered, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be strong like you." I held her close and smiled. "If you live kindly and love well, you're already strong." That night, after Sophie fell asleep, I stepped onto the porch. The world was still. Stars scattered across the sky, reflected in the freshly cleaned window glass. I looked around the house, the paint still fragrant, the corners feeling as if they'd come back to life. I touched the wall, feeling the cool brick and my own warmth. The pain, humiliation, betrayal, all of it seemed to drift off in the night breeze. Maybe this was the ending I never dared to dream of, not a victory, but a homecoming. Through the window, I saw Andrew asleep in a chair, still holding his new planning notebook. And Sophie, smiling in her sleep, lips murmuring, "Grandma." I smiled softly. One chapter had closed, opening another where I was no longer the erased mother but Helen Ward, the woman who found her way back home. And for the first time in years, I lifted my glass and spoke into the quiet night. Cheers to the past, the present, and to what's still waiting to bloom. That fall arrived gently. The maples by the porch turned gold, and a soft breeze moved through the open windows. I was 67, my hair almost entirely silver, yet I'd never felt younger than I did then. After years of silence, I realized people can be reborn not by magic, but by truth and courage. I started teaching again, not medicine, but how to heal from within. A local community center invited me to run a small class called Caring for Courage, for middle-aged women who'd been hurt, betrayed, or who had lost faith in themselves. On the first day, I walked into a small classroom with an old whiteboard, wooden chairs, and sunlight streaming through the windows. 12 women sat waiting, each carrying a different pain. One had just divorced after 30 years. One had been pushed out by her children. Another had lost her job at 58. They looked at me with eyes mixed with doubt and hope. I didn't bring a lecture. I just said, "I don't have a formula for happiness. I only know that sometimes we have to hit bottom to see the surface." The room went quiet. Then one woman cried. Then the second. The third. We stayed together for 3 hours, telling stories they'd never dared to speak aloud. I only listened, no judgment, no advice. At the end, I handed each of them a small slip of paper. It had just 4 words, "You are still here." The course ran for 3 months. From the original 12, it grew to 30, then 50. Women came from all over the state. They didn't come to hear me talk. They came to see that even someone who had been slapped by her own son at a dinner table could still get up and smile. The next March, I received an invitation from Women Reclaiming Power, a national conference for women who inspire others across America. The letter read, "We would like Mrs. Helen Ward to join as a keynote speaker to share your story, your journey from silence to strength." I read that line over and over, filled with a strange feeling. Years ago, I was invited to my son's company launch, where I sat at the last table, silent like a stranger. Now, they were asking me to stand on a stage. On the day of the conference, the hall in Boston was packed. More than 800 people attended, businesswomen, activists, teachers, and ordinary women like me. On the big screen, my name appeared, Helen Ward. the woman who stood up. I took a deep breath. As I stepped onto the stage, the lights were bright enough to sting, yet warm. I saw hundreds of faces looking up not to pity me, but to listen. I began with a small smile. I used to think I was just an ordinary mother. I believed love meant sacrifice, silence, endurance. Until one day, at a Thanksgiving dinner, my own son's hand struck my face, and I woke up. The hall went still. I looked toward the third row where Andrew and Sophie Saturday. My son wore a simple suit, without the old pride. Beside him, Sophie sat straight, eyes shining, her small hands clasped tight. I went on, my voice steady and unbroken, low, slow, and clear. A slap can knock you down. It can also wake you up if you choose to stand. I don't hate my son. I only hate that I let others define my worth for too long. A wave of silence rolled through the hall. I saw people wipe tears, others held hands. And then, when I spoke the last line, applause rose first scattered, then swelling, and finally a warm tide filling the room. I stood there, feeling every clap, every gaze turned upward. No one pitied me. They respected me as a woman who had found herself again. I bowed, thanked the audience, then looked down. Andrew looked at me, his eyes wet, but his smile gentle. Sophie stood up, clapping hard, her face glowing. When the talk ended, many people came to hug me, take pictures, and ask for an autograph. I smiled not for fame, but because I knew Helen Ward was no longer the mother of CEO Andrew Ward. She was simply herself. That night, we returned to a small hotel near the Charles River. Outside, lights shimmered on the water, and the wind carried the briny chill of early spring. I sat by the window, sipping ginger tea, feeling as if I'd just closed a life cycle. Andrew sat across from me, quiet for a long time, then said, "Mom, I watched the video of your speech. You know, I've never seen you so strong." I let out a small laugh. "I'm not really strong, son. I'm just not afraid anymore." Sophie ran over and hugged me. "Grandma, everyone in." The hall stood up and clapped for you. "You're famous now." I smoothed her hair and smiled. "I don't need to be famous, sweetheart. I just need people to know they're worthy of standing up, that's enough." Boston's night was quiet. Outside, the city lights floated on the river like drifting crystal. I looked in the mirror and saw a silver-haired woman with steady eyes and a calm smile. Not the smile of a victor, but of someone reborn. I knew I'd completed a journey from silenced and dismissed to a voice that's heard, from the CEO's mother to Helen Ward, the woman who dares to say no. I turned off the light and whispered into the dark, "Thank you, life, for giving me the chance to stand up." And as the river breeze slipped through the window, I felt it clearly. I was breathing, living, and freer than ever. I left Boston not long after the conference. My life moved into a new chapter, quiet, simple, and full of meaning. Now I live in a small house by the coast in Maine, where the morning sun pours through the windows and glints off the polished wood floors like a mirror. Outside are the sounds of waves, gulls calling to each other, and the salt on the wind. I planted white daisies around the house, the flowers my husband loved. They bloom each season, delicate yet resilient, just like the women who've been knocked down by storms but still rise, proud. In the mornings, I sit by the window with a cup of ginger tea, open my old typewriter, and start to write. My memoir is almost finished. I've titled it The Red Wine Secret. The story begins on that Thanksgiving night, the red wine spilling down a $10,000 white dress, my son's hand striking my face amid music and glittering lights. The moment my life collapsed, only to be reborn from the wreckage. As I wrote the final page, I realized what matters isn't what others did to me, it's what I did after I was hurt. I don't feel bitter anymore. I feel grateful because without that fall, I might never have discovered where my real strength lies. One afternoon, I was watering flowers on the porch when the phone rang. The caller ID showed one name, Andrew. I answered, and his voice came warm, warmer than ever. "Mom, I just read your manuscript. I don't know what to say except, I'm proud of you." I smiled, looking out at the sea. The waves gleamed amber in the sunset. "Thank you, Andrew," I said slowly. "But maybe, now I'm truly proud of myself." On the other end, I heard him laugh, the peaceful laugh I had wished for all those years. "Mom, I hope when the book comes out, people will understand why I always call you my quiet hero." I answered softly. "No, I'm just a mother who was once afraid, and finally learned to say no." We were quiet for a moment. I heard Sophie laughing in the background, calling Grandma through the phone. I smiled the smile of someone who'd traveled the full circle of pain to return to love. That evening, I sat in front of a small camera, ready to record a short video for those who followed my journey. Warm light reflected off the glass of red wine beside me. I looked into the lens and spoke naturally, light as the breeze. If you've been humiliated, treated unfairly, please don't stay silent forever. Sometimes, silence is the first step to reclaiming your dignity, but only if you choose to rise from it. I paused, lifted the glass, and held it up to the lens. The sunset glinted on the glass, casting a ribbon of red like blood, but also like fire. This red used to be shame, a wound, but today, it's a symbol of freedom. I tapped the glass lightly, the light trembling like a greeting to my own past. After the video ended, I stepped onto the porch and listened to the waves. The sky deepened to violet. Far off, the lighthouse came on, turning slowly, shining across the glittering water. I closed my eyes, tasting the salt on my lips, and felt a rare calm settle in. I learned over a lifetime that freedom isn't about letting go of everything. It's when you're no longer afraid of losing anything. I'm no longer the mother of CEO Andrew Ward. I'm no longer the woman humiliated at a dinner party. I am Helen Ward, the woman who stood up and chose to live true to herself. I set the camera down and replayed the video. My voice filled the small room, mingling with the sound of the sea. I listened, not to edit, but to remind myself, never fear your own voice, because sometimes a single word can save your entire life. I looked up at the moonlight pouring through the window, spilling across the table, and the glass of red wine still catching the last of the sunset. I took a small sip, the tannins easing across my tongue, the taste of freedom. And then I spoke softly to myself. Small but steady. Cheers. To all the women learning to stand up. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this story. I know somewhere out there, you've seen a mother, a grandmother, or even yourself hurt and afraid to speak. If this story made you feel less alone, tell me where you're watching from and share how it touched you in the comments. I've always believed that respect and justice never go out of style. If you believe that too, please like and subscribe so we can tell more stories of strong women, women who don't need rescuing, only to be heard. Because somewhere inside each of us, there's a Helen Ward waiting to wake up.